Speaking of teams with bad offensive lines, or at least the Texans have a much worse offensive line than anyone else, than any team we've spoken about so far. The Texans lost DeAndre Hopkins, and that's kind of huge. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're down on the Texans. Do you see the Texans competing for a wild card?
I think that they could, but this team is starting to remind me a little bit more of the Seahawks in that, they're going to really have to be carried by Deshaun Watson to get to the postseason. The loss of Hopkins is huge. And now he has weapons in the receiving core, a lot of name recognition, but there's no one that's really reliable because Brandon Cooks has injury issues. So does Will Fuller. So does Randall Cobb. And Kenny Stills is a solid receiver who can start on the outside, but I feel like you don't want him to have to be one of your more consistent weapons because he's more of a deep threat, big play threat. So I think they're dealing with they could deal with a lot of injuries at that position. They don't have a ton of proven talent at tight end. And as you mentioned, their offensive line outside of Laramie Tunsil is pretty bad. I mean, they mega reached for Titus Howard in the first round in 2019, and he did not look pro ready at all last year. Max Sharping did not look great. He was another draft pick. He started a lot at left guard. Nick Martin's fine at center. Zach Fulton has played well at times at right guard. So those guys are solid but unspectacular. They're the types of guys who, if you have strong players around them, you can totally get by. But where they're surrounded by a couple of weaker young players, they're going to have to hope that those guys get better if they want to compete. So I think their offense is going to be carried by Deshaun Watson. And I think defense, they just are they've had some losses there too. They lost DJ Reader and they didn't really replace him because Timmy Jernigan's deal got voided. They did draft Ross Blacklock in the second round, so he'll probably be the guy there. But I just think this team is bound to regress. Their defense isn't as strong as it was earlier in Bill O'Brien's tenure because he has hemorrhaged talent from there, including the horrific Jadeveon Clowney trade. So I think that relying on Deshaun Watson to carry this team to the playoffs is, it's a safe bet that he'll at least be able to keep them competitive, but it's going to be tough for them to make noise in this division because it's pretty crowded.
Jacob, how could you say that he has to carry the team with these great names like David Johnson and Randall Cobb and Brandon Cooks? Like, if this were 2016, like the Texans would be amazing right now. Like, unfortunately, that's not the case. It's 2020 last time I checked, and these guys aren't good anymore. Like David Johnson, he can't stay healthy. Brandon Cooks is one concussion away from being done playing football forever. Unfortunately, Randall Cobb, he's kind of a shell of his former self. He actually didn't have a bad year last year, but I can't see that holding up again. There's Will Fuller, and Fuller, I like Fuller, but he can't stay healthy either. He's always banged up. And so, yeah, Deshaun Watson is going to have to carry the team, like you said. And like Russell Wilson, he could get the Texans into the playoffs. And it wouldn't surprise me if that happens. But the Texans have such bad, they have such bad coaching. They don't block well. They're as I said, their supporting cast always gets hurt. As you mentioned, on defense, they lost DJ Reader, which is just a huge loss. The Texans were great against the run, partly because of DJ Reader, and now he's gone. Like you said, they haven't replaced him. JJ Watt is still there, but he's always banged up too. Like, you can't count on him staying healthy. The secondary is just okay. Like, Bradley Roby is hit or miss. If he has a good year, that can help a lot. But he's always like having a good year, then a terrible year, a good year, a terrible year. So you never know what you're going to get out of him. Linebackers are okay, but then you have Bill O'Brien, who's just a joke. And so the Texans, they had the potential to get 10-6 or something like that, but they also could go 5-11 if things fall apart. So I don't have them making the playoffs, but I think they could. So I don't think we need to say much more about them. One team that is definitely not going to make the playoffs is the Jacksonville Jaguars. In fact, I think they might have the worst record in the NFL next year. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think they're primed just to have a terrible year unless they can somehow miraculously turn things around. I just don't think that. I think that the team made the wrong decision bringing Doug Marrone into the year as the head coach. I tend to hate it when a team considers firing a guy pretty publicly like the Jaguars did. Like, it was well known. And in fact, I think some reporters even thought that they were going to fire Marrone, but they kept him on board for another year. So that's just that's the epitome of being a lame duck. We saw it with Jay Gruden last year. He was still the coach of the Redskins, but they started the year 0-5 and he was out the door, and it was just a disaster because he couldn't really command too much of the team because they knew he was skating on thin ice. I think Marone's going to be in a similar situation. The Jaguars don't have a good offensive line. They don't have a proven quarterback. I know people like Gardner Minshew, and I think he has the ceiling of a very, very good backup. And, he could be a solid enough starter. I don't think he's going to ever be like an above average NFL starter, but I think he can get by. I think he'll be one of the best backups in the game, but I don't trust him to quarterback a team mostly devoid of weapons to any sort of winning year. Basically, you're looking at DJ Chark, D.D. Westbrook, and second-round pick Laviska Shenault carrying this team, which, they're all good young talents, but they're only going to be able to get so far. And, Leonard Fournette wants out, it seems. Yannick Ngakoue wants out. They may get traded this offseason or later during the regular season, whenever that may start. So if you just look at this team, there's just not enough talent at any level of the defense. There's not enough talent on offense. And I think they have a rebuild ahead of them. And they may be able to accelerate it if they can develop some of their young talent this year. But like the ceiling of this team is like maybe a 4-win squad. And that might be generous.
Yeah, I would think so. This team reminds me of the Dolphins last year. Except they don't have a good coach. This team could quit on Doug Marrone, whereas the Dolphins last year, they were awful to start the year. Like they were getting blown out left and right. Like fading them was easy money. And then something happened. Like they got better somehow, despite not having much talent. And then ended up being like Brian Flores ended up being a very good coach, and he got some of his disappointing players in the past to perform well, like Devontae Parker, for example. Like he had a huge year. Several other players on the team improved, and it was all because of Flores and his coaching staff. Like they did a phenomenal job. Conversely, like the Jaguars don't have a good coaching staff, so like they're not going to get better as the year progresses. Like they're only going to get worse. Like you said, they're going to trade Ngakoue at some point. They're going to trade Fournette at some point. Wouldn't surprise me if they traded another player where you don't really have a radar on. Like I think it's just going to be like a free for all, like fire sale. Because they're tanking for Trevor Lawrence. Like that's what they want to do. And I think it's a good strategy. I mean, like 2 years from now, 3 years from now, they're going to be in playoff contention, but not this year. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if they went 0-16. Like this team's just bad. They can't do anything well except the receivers are good. Like DJ Chark is great. D.D. Westbrook's okay. And then like you said, they have Shenault too, who has upside. We'll see. But this team just doesn't really have anything else going on if they trade Ngakoue and Fournette. So I think I have them going 1-15 on the site. I'm definitely going under win total. I think this is one of the easiest plays for win totals this year.
Yeah, I would agree. I would definitely go the under here. And I just want to mention a comment. Doug, I'm going to call you Doug Z because I don't want to mess up your last name pronunciation, is pointing out that the Jaguars have a new offensive coordinator. Unfortunately, that coordinator is Jay Gruden. And, Gruden's been a good offensive coordinator in the past, and I actually think he'll be fine. But, like, this was a terrible situation for Gruden to come into after being the lame duck in Washington and now having to come to Jacksonville to another lame duck coaching staff. I don't know if he's going to be able to get his whole system in. And, Gardner Minshew is going to be dealing with a whole new system to learn during what's turning out to be a condensed offseason because of the pandemic going on. So I think that hurts the Jaguars too. So I just think the coaching staff overall just has so many problems with it. And I don't look forward to watching the Jaguars play unless I am betting against them. And I most likely will be.
Yeah, it's a great point on your part. This offseason is going to be all about teams that have continuity, whether it's personnel-wise or coaching staff. It's not a good offseason for a quarterback to learn a new system. It really isn't. And it's not like Gardner Minshew is this established quarterback who's super smart. Like maybe he's smart. I don't know if he is or not, but like he's not Tom Brady or anything who can come into Tampa and do well. And we'll discuss him in a little bit. He's I think that, someone like Minshew learning a new system in his second year, I think that could be very problematic. So I don't like the Jaguars at all. Like like I said, I'm going 1-15 and betting them under is pretty, I think is very easy. All right, let's talk about the odds in this division. So to win the AFC South, the Colts are plus 125, the Titans are plus 185, The Texans are plus 330 and the Jaguars at plus 3,000. This is all on five. This is all on 5 dimes. Anything stand out there?
I think that's just about how it should shake out. I think it's interesting given that the Texans have won the division so many times that they're at plus 300. Actually, I don't like Bill O'Brien, and we talked about the issues with the Texans. I don't hate the idea of putting a small wager on them just because we've seen Deshaun Watson carry teams in the past. So I would consider that. But I think I'd be all over the Colts, where it's not like the greatest number of all time, but I think they're a pretty safe bet to, if not win the division, at least be in very close contention for it. So at plus 125, I really like that. I probably put a unit on that.
Yeah, it's not bad. None of these are great numbers, right? Like I don't think there's any great value here, but I do think that, you know, if you want to bet the Colts at, you know, plus 125, I think that's pretty solid. I think that's the only move I'd make here. And definitely don't bet the Jaguars plus 3,000 no matter what you do. That was just awful.